and welcome to our accessibility training for service providers.
We're now going to take a moment to introduce ourselves as the presenters for this training. My name is Rachel Betts, and my photo is on the left-hand side of this slide. I am a white cisgender woman who is 5'9" and of French Canadian and Scottish descent. I have blue eyes and blonde curly hair that has grown to fall just past my shoulders. In terms of academics, I am currently completing my Master's of Social Work at Carleton University in Ottawa, alongside my co-presenter Fallon. I have also completed Carleton's Bachelor of Social Work Honors Degree program, as well as a Bachelor of Psychology from McGill University with a double minor in Behavioral Neuroscience and Gender, Sexuality, Feminist Social Justice. Professionally, I work at Carleton's Accessible Career Transitions program, where I conduct intakes and offer advising to Carleton students with disabilities who are transitioning into the workforce. I also have direct experience with invisible disabilities, as I have ADHD, dysthymia, and anxiety with symptoms of chronic pain.
My name is Fallon Longton. I am a white cisgender woman of French Canadian and Irish descent. I am 5 feet in height, have light auburn medium-length hair, and blue-gray eyes. As Rachel mentioned, I am currently obtaining my Master's of Social Work from Carleton University in Ottawa. Previously, I completed my Bachelor's of Social Work degree at McGill University, and prior to my bachelor's, I obtained my Social Service Worker diploma from St. Lawrence College. Professionally, I have experience working with and providing support to various communities, including individuals with disabilities and their families. More specifically, my experience includes case management and care coordination for older adults experiencing hearing loss, as well as additional complex healthcare needs and disabilities. Additionally, advocating in collaboration with and directly supporting individuals with physical and intellectual disabilities in both residential and community settings. I have direct experience with visible disabilities as my younger sibling has Down syndrome, and direct experience with invisible disabilities as I too have ADHD. Before we begin our presentation, we would like to take a moment to recognize that we are meeting and presenting on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. As settlers who live and work on this land, we are committed to acknowledging the rich history, presence, and ongoing contributions of the Algonquin peoples, who have been stewards of this land for countless generations. The recording of this presentation is taking place November 2024, during Indigenous Disability Awareness Month, a time to reflect on the unique experiences and contributions of Indigenous peoples with disabilities, as well as bring awareness to and challenge unique barriers Indigenous people with disabilities face. Additionally, in our work as helping professionals, it is crucial that we reflect upon how we engage with the legacies of colonization, how this intersects with disability, and working towards fostering respectful and inclusive practices to challenge colonial legacies to provide equitable support to service users impacted by colonization. Let us hold this awareness throughout this presentation, honoring Indigenous communities past and present, and committing meaningful action toward truth and reconciliation. Alongside this acknowledgement, we share an image on the Land Acknowledgement PowerPoint slide from nativeland.ca. to visually represent the Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory where we are presenting from. It is a map with overlapping shades of green to highlight the Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory. The visual does also indicate overlapping territory with the Kanekeha Nation.
This accessibility training for service providers is inspired by the following quote: "If the disability community wants a world that is accessible to us, then we must make ideas and experiences of disability accessible to the world." Leto 2021. Hence, the following training is meant to provide an introduction to fundamental disability terms and concepts, with the goal of offering a learning opportunity for people who provide services to the public to be better equipped to ensure that their work is accessible and inclusive for people with disabilities.
Before we dive into our presentation, let's take a moment to review the agenda. We'll start with an introduction and overview, where we'll define disability and set the stage for our discussion. Next, we'll be exploring the models of disability, including the medical, social, and continuum models. followed by the concept of intersectionality and its relevance to our practice as helping professionals. From there, we'll discuss the importance of inclusive language and explore the concepts of cultural competency and cultural humility. We'll also review how to navigate making mistakes as professionals and address professional privilege while exploring strategies for repositioning power dynamics toward empowerment. Later, we'll cover actionable practices for providing person centered services and fostering allyship, examine microaggressions and their impact. Finally, we'll conclude by highlighting actionable steps to move forward, including the principles of universal design to leave you with strategies and tools to provide more equitable and inclusive practices. Now let's review the learning objectives for today's presentation. By the end, we aim for you to have a clear understanding of key terms and concepts such as disability, accessibility, and inclusion. We'll also reflect on biases and assumptions, encouraging you to rethink idea of what is considered quote unquote normal. We'll explore new approaches to interacting humbly and adaptively with the diverse experiences within the disability community. You'll also identify opportunities to enhance accessibility in your own practice settings through inclusive practices. Finally, we aim to emphasize empowerment by valuing and promoting the voices and expertise of service users with disabilities, fostering equity and service delivery.
How do you perceive disability? Each person holds a unique lens through which they understand the world, including how they interpret disability, even if they're not consciously aware of it. This perspective is shaped by personal experiences, learning, and preconceived notions, and we are all guilty of occasionally making automatic assumptions and generalizations. This frame of reference we use to understand the world around us influences how we act, what we say, and what we might avoid saying when disability comes up in conversation. Confronting one's own ableist assumptions, discounting statements, and misguided actions is never easy. If discussing disability feels uncomfortable, perhaps you sense that your internalized mental model might be outdated and that it's time for a new perspective. Unfortunately, it is hard to even define disability without using diminishing language that focuses on lack or deficit and implies that to have a disability is to be less than someone who is able-bodied or minded. The best definition we have is that disability is an evolving concept generated by the interaction between persons with impairments/diverse abilities and the barriers they encounter due to stigmatizing attitudes and inaccessible environments that hinders their full participation in society. In addition, although people are quick to think of physical disabilities such as paraplegia, disabilities can also take invisible forms, such as depression and learning disabilities. Disabilities also exist along a continuum. For example, ADHD is largely genetic. In my case, I know that my ADHD likely comes from my mom. However, despite my mom having many ADHD characteristics and us being very similar, she was never diagnosed with ADHD and does not identify as having ADHD because her traits never resulted in her experiencing challenges in everyday life. Whereas I have a diagnosis, identify as having a disability, and both take medications to regulate my symptoms while also sometimes requiring accommodations because it takes me more time to process or produce coursework, for example. To help with the development of a more holistic view of disability, we will be discussing 3 different models of disability. While the term models of disability may sound academic, it's essential knowledge for anyone who wants to advocate for inclusion effectively. To truly celebrate disability as an aspect of human diversity and work towards a more equitable society, it's important to recognize which frameworks you operate within and what their merits or limitations might be. There are several models of disability, but Fallon and I would agree that the best ones affirm people as they are. The 2 foundational models we will be discussing in this training are the medical model and the social model of disability. One of these has dominated for centuries, often causing harm. To understand the underlying source of harm, we will first discuss what is ableism. Ableism is the discrimination of and social prejudice against people with diverse abilities based on the belief that able bodies and minds are superior. Those deemed abled are idealized as the norm. Accepting this notion of what is normal frames able bodies and minds as being fundamental to being fully human and deserving of full participation within society. The exclusion of people without these same abilities is therefore viewed as acceptable. In other words, ableism is an ideology and system of oppression that is based on the belief that some people are more valuable than others, and within this hierarchy, people with disabilities are treated as inferior. This devaluation comes with the assumption that people with disabilities are less worthy of respect, which then leads to practices and structures that excludes them and limits their potential to thrive. Like racism and sexism, ableism classifies entire groups of people as less than and includes harmful stereotypes, misconceptions, and generalizations of people with disability. Consequently, this hierarchy between abled and disabled places those deemed abled in positions of power, where they are the ones defining what it means to be disabled and choosing whether or not to make spaces accessible. This, ironically, leaves people with disabilities in a position where they often find themselves having to accommodate the able-bodied by taking on the burden of creatively navigating inaccessible spaces for fear of being burdensome. Ableism informs the first model of disability we will be discussing. The medical model of disability suggests that people are disabled by their impairments or differences compared to the imagined standard of what is normal for minds and bodies. Accordingly, the emphasis of this model is on so-called cures aimed at eliminating perceived defects. The result of treating different capabilities as impairments needing to be fixed is that this feeds into stigmatizing attitudes and oppressive behaviors, the worst of which being eugenic practices that attempt to eliminate human variability altogether. Another consequence of this model is that by identifying disability as an individual problem, this places the burden on people with disabilities to address their needs rather than making inclusion a collective responsibility. This individual focus also fails to recognize how social and environmental structures can create barriers that effectively disempower people with disabilities. This ableist notion has in fact been found to be common among Canadians, as research suggests that many Canadians attribute the primary responsibility for social inclusion of those living with disabilities on disabled people themselves and their families. The effect of finding fault at the level of individuals without assessing the context in which they live is that it limits society's ability to recognize the value in creation of structures that could facilitate the flourishing of all people. Here's an example to better understand this perspective. A wheelchair user wants to enter a clinic, but there's no ramp. The medical model says that the person's inability to enter the shop is due to the person's impairment. The problem is the person's impairment, not the building's lack of access. Now, it's important to take a moment here to state that this critique of the medical model is not meant to imply that all medical interventions are useless or unwanted. For instance, people with chronic pain may be thankful for medical interventions that improve their quality of life. Still, disabilities in general should not be assumed to necessarily result in a worse quality of life. Automatically interpreting all disabilities as inferior states of being and in need of fixing disregards the inevitability and inherent value of diversity among bodies and minds. Still, when considering the medical model, it is important to remember that being the same as people without disabilities is not the goal. Rather, the goal is inclusion. Stienska, 2018. With regards to how the prevalence of the medical model impacts real-world opportunities, I would like to offer one more example. Imagine a person who is searching for a job on the internet using a screen reader because they have vision loss. They find a job that they are well qualified for, but applicants are required to submit a form online, and the form is not made in an accessible manner, so his screen reader can't read the form to him. He tries calling the office and asks them to email him a PDF version of the form so that he can apply, but the office fails to follow up and never sends the document. The result is that not only does this man miss a job opportunity through no fault of his own, but this office also misses out on hiring someone who was well qualified for the job because they failed to address a barrier to job applications. The point is that this man's vision loss is The point is that this man's vision loss is only experienced as a disability in that moment because an external barrier impeded his ability to achieve his goal and showcase his competency to the hiring manager. The problem was not at the level of the individual, as this could have been avoided if the employer had taken the time and reflected on whether or not the process was accessible. This kind of situation is quite common, in part because the medical model does not motivate us as a community to evaluate the accessibility of our workplaces, products, or services, because this model assumes that persons with disability must figure things out on their own. The moral here is that we as service providers have the power to examine our policies and practices to purposefully remove barriers to access, thereby creating more inclusive spaces. When comparing these two foundational models of disability, the medical model excludes something that social models help bring into clearer view, that it is the way that society is structured that creates problems or disabilities. Accordingly, the social model of disability shifts the focus from fixing individuals to changing the world around them. It views disability not as a problem within a person, but instead as a result of unfair systems and environments that limit access and inclusion. Instead of emphasizing medical cures that assume something is wrong with the person, this approach prioritizes creating spaces and systems that accommodate different needs and abilities to improve everyone's quality of life. The question here becomes The key question becomes, how can we redesign society and its structures to be more inclusive, rather than forcing individuals to adapt to rigid, perhaps outdated standards? This way of thinking helps reveal how many barriers are created by societal norms and institutions, rather than being inevitable or natural individual disabilities. An example according to this view would be a wheelchair user wants to enter a clinic, but there is no ramp. The social model says that the individual is disabled only by the lack of a ramp to the building, which removes access, independence, and opportunity. The inaccessible environment is the problem. Over time, the social model has evolved and contributed to additional models, including the post-social, structural, and biopsychosocial models of disability, which build upon this framework with the goal of developing an increasingly holistic view of disability. While a full description of these models is beyond the scope of the current training, what these models suggest is that neither the medical nor the social model provide a full picture of disability. Instead, disability must be understood through the integration of all aspects of a person's identity. This identity is comprised of and impacted by a combination of several contributing factors, including social, environmental, and structural factors, as well as biology, physiology, and psychology. The conclusion is that disabilities can be an integral part of a person's identity at an individual level and a source of pride, while the project of inclusion must also consider larger social, political, and environmental structures as we work towards collective action to increase inclusivity. An example of this would be a wheelchair user wants to enter a clinic, but there's no ramp. The biopsychosocial model says that a person's motor impairment, which is part of their identity, may prevent the person from accessing the stairs, but a ramp removes this barrier, enabling universal access and improving quality of life. Intersectionality is an additional metaphor that further enhances the social model of disability. Intersectionality is a way of understanding how multiple forms of inequality and disadvantage overlap, creating unique and often compounded obstacles. It looks at how interconnected systems of oppression and privilege, like ableism, racism, and sexism, are connected, and how they affect individuals in complex and interdependent ways. By considering the social and environmental contexts in which oppression occurs, intersectionality helps us see how things like ability, race, and gender can combine to create different kinds of discrimination or privilege. It is important to note that rather than the impacts of different forms of oppression being additive, as if they were wholly separate layers of domination, instead they combine to create a unique experience. This means that women with disabilities often experience a different form of ableism from men with disabilities, just as they experience a different form of sexism from non-disabled women. For instance, women with ADHD are far more likely to go undiagnosed compared to men because the stereotype of ADHD is the hyperactive form, which is more common among men. Also, rather than being over-sexualized as women often are, women with disabilities are often regarded as asexual. Similarly, privileges impact how people with disabilities experience disability as well as access. For instance, within a capitalist society, people who have a disability but have the financial resources to access any accommodations they might need, such as medical equipment, are thereby able to buy their access. On this slide, you'll see a wheel of privilege and power made by the Canadian government, listing a variety of markers of identity and depicting them so that the closer you are to the center, the more privilege you have.
Inclusive language plays a powerful role in fostering respect, dignity, and empowerment for people with disabilities. It reflects not only our awareness of diversity, but also our commitment to equity in the way we communicate and interact. One of the most important aspects of inclusive language is respecting individual preferences. For example, some people prefer person first language, such as person with autism, which places the individual before their disability. Others may prefer identity first language, like autistic person, as it embraces disability as an integral part of their identity. As helping professionals, it's essential to ask people how they wish to be addressed and to respect their choice. It is also important to recognize that language is not static, meaning the language we use can evolve over time, along with cultural and societal norms. Terms that may have been acceptable in the past may no longer align with the values of an individual or a community today. Staying informed and open to adapting our language, the ways in which we communicate and interact, is a key element to maintaining inclusive practices. Using inclusive language is also about challenging stigma. Words can carry power, and the way we speak about disabilities can either reinforce harmful stereotypes or work to challenge and dismantle them. By focusing on language that highlights respect and dignity, rather than limitation or deficit, we can contribute to a more equitable and inclusive environment. There are a few practical steps we can take to ensure our language is inclusive. When in doubt, ask or mirror the language used by the person or community. Avoid assumptions and stay away from outdated terms that might perpetuate bias. Normalize respectful discussions about disability. Disability is not a taboo topic, and addressing it openly and respectfully can break down barriers. Ultimately, inclusive language isn't about finding a one-size-fits-all solution. It's about being intentional, respectful, and adaptive in how we communicate. By listening, learning, and remaining open, we can ensure our language aligns with the values of the communities we serve. When working with diverse populations, it's crucial to understand the concept of cultural competency and cultural humility. These practices guide us in fostering inclusive, equitable, and respectful environments for service users, particularly those with disabilities. Cultural competency is defined as the ability to work effectively across cultural differences by recognizing, valuing, and adapting to diverse backgrounds and needs. Importantly, it's not a a one-time achievement, but a lifelong process of developing self-awareness, cultural awareness, and applying this knowledge to our practices. Cultural humility complements cultural competency by focusing on a continuous commitment to self-reflection and self-critique. It emphasizes addressing power imbalances in service provider and service user relationships and understanding service users' experiences from their perspective. Unlike cultural competency, cultural humility does not imply mastery, but instead fosters mutual trust and collaboration. To avoid reinforcing stereotypes or discriminatory practices, we as helping professionals must critically examine how our perspective, often shaped by dominant cultural norms, impact the way we support individuals with disabilities. These norms can perpetuate ableism and marginalize those we aim to serve. Understanding disability as a culture, rather than through a deficit or medical lens, allows us to recognize the strengths, values, and unique experiences of people with disabilities. This cultural recognition promotes an empowering and inclusive environment. Training and workshops, such as this one, play a vital role in guiding professionals to reflect on their assumptions and challenge implicit biases. Embedding cultural context in professional training ensures that we are better equipped to provide care that respects and supports the varied experiences of our service users. Cultural humility reminds us that diversity exists even within communities. Cultural humility reminds us that diversity exists even within communities, and general knowledge alone does not reflect the lived experiences of each individual. Maintaining an openness to continued learning, even when mistakes are made, is essential to fostering truly inclusive practices. By integrating cultural competency and cultural humility into our practices, we can create environments that are not only inclusive but also empowering. These practices challenge us to be intentional in our approach and ensure that we respect and value the diversity of those we serve. Recognizing and apologizing for mistakes is an essential practice that aligns with cultural humility and competency in professional contexts, building trust and strengthening relationships with service users. Practicing cultural humility starts with self-awareness. As professionals, we need to identify the mistakes we make in our work and have the humility to recognize and admit to them. This is not a sign of weakness, but a strength that fosters accountability and mutual respect in our relationships with service users. Admitting mistakes allows us to disrupt power imbalances and engage in reflective practices that contribute to more inclusive service delivery. Creating a safe space for service users to openly communicate when they feel a mistake has been made is crucial. This involves building rapport and encouraging service users to voice their concerns without fear of judgment. It's important for us as professionals to actively listen and acknowledge their feedback. Mistakes are inevitable. However, it's important to avoid defensiveness in our response to our mistakes. By avoiding defensiveness and instead offering genuine apologies, we can address mistakes in a way that reinforces trust and respect. Apologizing is not a symbolic act. It reflects our commitment to accountability and ethical practice. Addressing mistakes collaboratively with service users means working together to rectify errors and find solutions that meet their needs. Collaborative resolution strengthens the partnership, shifting the power dynamic towards equity. It's also important to acknowledge the diversity of experiences among service users. One-size-fits-all solutions rarely work, so we need to remain open to learning from each individual's unique perspective. Finally, learning is an ongoing process. Even as professionals, we should remain curious and open to new knowledge and insights, recognizing that no matter how much we know, there is always more to learn. Professional privilege refers to the implicit power and advantages that helping professionals hold in their roles. This privilege stems from the authority we have to act as agents or gatekeepers, facilitating or restricting access to essential services and supports for service users with disabilities. Professional privilege is both earned and unearned. It allows professionals to define what is considered normal, healthy, or moral. This power shapes societal norms and directly impacts how service users experience and navigate the world. In practice, professional privilege can lead to a helper or savior mindset, where professionals see themselves as the authority rather than as collaborative partners. This often aligns with a tendency to view disabilities through a medical or deficit lens, which can unintentionally reinforce ableist assumptions. Privilege is also reinforced through a process known as othering. This occurs when service users are positioned as inferior or passive recipients of service, creating a hierarchical power dynamic that perpetuates inequity and marginalization. To address these issues, we must work towards collaborative, emancipatory practices. These practices recognize service users as experts in their own experiences and promote partnership that challenges traditional power hierarchies. As helping professionals, one of the most critical shifts we can make is transitioning from the role of expert to that of an ally. This shift is foundational. This shift is foundational to redistributing power and creating equitable, inclusive practices when working with service users with disabilities. Effective allyship involves recognizing and amplifying the lived experiences and voices of individuals with disabilities. Instead of imposing solutions as an Instead of imposing solutions, an ally supports service users on their journeys, respecting their expertise over their own lives, promoting their autonomy and right to self-determination. True allyship is not a single action, it's an ongoing process. It requires consistent reflection and a commitment to challenging structural ableism within professional practices. The traditional expert role often positions professionals as authoritative figures, which can unintentionally marginalize service users and diminish their agency. Transitioning to an ally role involves recognizing service users as the experts, shifting the power dynamic to one of collaboration. Redistributing power requires us to dismantle the we-they divide that can exist between professionals and service users. This means consciously fostering partnerships where both parties are equal, breaking down hierarchical barriers. We must shift from working on to working with service users. This fosters a sense of partnership and mutual respect. Some practical strategies to redistribute power include creating space for service users to narrate their own experiences, valuing their lived experiences as a source of knowledge, and prioritizing their voices in decision-making processes. This also involves practices like active listening, acknowledging client expertise, and ensuring universally designed, accessible environments to support diverse needs. Redistributing power also means embracing discomfort. Relinquishing control can feel challenging, but it's a vital step toward creating more equitable and inclusive service delivery. By committing to these practices, we can break down power imbalances and build meaningful partnerships with service users. Microaggressions are subtle, often unintentional actions, statements, or behaviors that communicate bias or discrimination against marginalized groups. These can occur in everyday interactions, and while they may seem minor, they can have profound cumulative impact on individuals experiencing them. To better understand microaggressions, we will now watch a short video that provides real-life examples and captures the impact that these interactions can have on people who are marginalized.
For people who still don't think that microaggressions are a problem,
Oh, you're so well spoken.
just imagine instead of being a stupid comment, a microaggression is a mosquito bite.
Ugh, it's a compliment.
Mosquito bites and their itch are one of nature's most annoying features. But if you're only bitten every once in a while,
No, where are you really from?
Cleveland?
sure, it's annoying, but it's not that big a deal. The problem is that some people get bitten by mosquitoes a lot more than other people. I mean, a lot more. Whether it's on a date,
Oh, your English is so good.
Excuse me?
going grocery shopping,
You know, everything happens for a reason.
I'm just buying apples.
commuting to work,
So when are you gonna have a baby?
watching TV,
We have to keep the Redskins name. It's part of our culture and history.
or just walking down the street with your partner.
I couldn't even tell you were gay.
Mosquitoes seem to pop up
Do you
everywhere.
know John? Give me shopping advice. I'll share too.
And getting bit by mosquitoes every day,
Can I touch your hair?
multiple times a day,
Pretty. Can
Can I touch it, please? Can I please?
is annoying. That makes you want to go ballistic on those mosquitoes, which seems like a huge overreaction to people who only get bit every once in a while.
It's just a mosquito bite. Who cares? Just another angry black woman.
Of course, beyond just being annoying, some mosquitoes carry truly threatening diseases that can mess up your life for years.
Astrophysics? Maybe you should try less challenging, Major.
Ow, my dreams.
And other mosquitoes carry strains that can even kill you.
He looked like he was up to trouble, okay? I felt threatened.
So next time you think someone's overreacting, just remember, some people experience mosquito bites all the time.
You're all so exotic. Wow.
And by mosquito bites, we mean microaggressions.
Now that we've watched the video, it's important to reflect on how microaggressions can consciously or unconsciously show up in our practices and environments. Recognizing and addressing these moments is crucial for fostering inclusive, respectful interactions, eliminating systemic biases. We'll now briefly review and recap the key steps and tools discussed throughout the presentation for offering equitable support to service users with disabilities. First, ensuring to acknowledge and respect the expertise of service users in their own experiences. Prioritize their voices in decision-making processes and actively challenge any assumptions we may hold. Collaboration is key. Approach your work as an ally, breaking away from the traditional service user service provider power imbalance. Use inclusive and preferred language that upholds dignity and promotes inclusion. If missteps or harm occur, sincerely apologize and collaborate with service users to resolve the issue. Finally, focus on promoting autonomy and empowerment, respecting service users' right to self-determination as the foundation for equitable service delivery.
Another useful concept moving forward is universal design. Universal design involves intentionally creating environments, services, information, and products to be as accessible as possible to as many people as possible, even across diverse abilities and experiences. This approach is based on the principle that what is needed or helpful to those with specific needs can also benefit us all. For examples on how to design your work environment, service delivery policies, and workplace culture to be more inclusive, please pause the video now. If you take away one thing from this training, let it be this. Positive change starts with how we choose to think. By adopting a view of disability that is more inclusive, we can renew our appreciation for the inherent value of diversity.
Thank you so much for your participation, and thank you for your commitment to providing equitable and accessible services. For a full list of references, please see the notes below this YouTube video. Thank you again.
Thank you.